look at focus on issues and actions that are specifically relevant to our local region. We have a Facebook page. You can join us that way or by email at siouxclimatehub@gmail.com. Our current focus is through Facebook and this webinar series, but we're hoping post-COVID, if that doesn't happen,
I can't even see it.
that we will be able to expand our public outreach through face-to-face events. And notably, there are no membership fees. Next slide, please. I'd like to begin tonight's presentation with a land acknowledgement. We'd like to acknowledge that we are in Robinson Huron territory and that the land in which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, and specifically the Garden River and Batchewana First Nations, as well as Métis people. Tonight's speaker is Rob Keane, the CEO of Forest Ontario. Rob is a professional forester. He spent the past 40 years or so working in forestry as a consultant in various other capacities in central Ontario. Forest Ontario is a not-for-profit organization focusing on tree planting, stewardship, and forest education and awareness. The Forest Ontario 50 Million Tree Program is a tree planting program supported by the Government of Canada, as well as various corporate donors, corporate sponsors and donors. The presentation today is Forest Climate Change and the 50 Million Tree Program. I'd also like to mention that our next presentation is going to be on public health and climate change, and we are hoping to have someone from the Algoma Health Unit present that. And just before we start, I'd also like to mention and acknowledge Ted McPherson, Tobin Kern, and Carmen Nelson, as well as Paul and Tanya Hazlitt now, as key participants in helping us put this webinar series together. So on that note, Rob, if you could start, that'd be great.
Thank you very much, Rob. And it's a real pleasure to be here tonight and to join you folks up in the Sault Ste. Marie. I just as we're noticing who's here tonight, I just wanted to, as we'll be talking about the 50 million program, acknowledge some of a couple of key partners that have to be showing up tonight. One is Carrie Mclaughlin, and she's the CEO with the Forest Gene Conservation Association. A great speaker, and certainly the key with the seed collection side of getting the right trees planted in the right place. So Carrie, it's great to have you here, as well as Doug Hevenar, who is the CEO of the Nottasulga Valley Conservation Authority, which is just a little bit north of Toronto, and certainly one of our key partners in delivering the 50 million program. So it's great to see those folks here. As Rob was saying, I'm here tonight to talk about the climate change and forests and the 50 million program. And I'm going to tack on a little on the 2 billion tree program, if you don't mind. I think it's fortunately it's a still relevant topic, and I'll speak to that in a few minutes. But it's certainly a program that we're very invested in and would love to see get moving on in a more significant way. Now, let's just make sure this is going to work. There, it's working. Awesome. So thanks, Rob, again for the introduction. Just quickly, Forest Ontario is a not-for-profit charity. Our main focuses are tree planting, and certainly we have the 50 million program that we do here in Ontario, predominantly on private lands, and it's afforestation, tree planting. That's the creation of new forests. It's not the reforestation, which the forest industry does and do very well. So we're about building new forests and growing new forests. We have forestry education, which is really engaging with youth and working towards enhancing the passion of youth for the environment with the hopes that they will become our future stewards. And community engagement and awareness, and it really is, that's all about making people more aware about how important our forests are and how well we manage them here in Canada at a sustainable level, and how important the forest values are and all the things associated with the forest are to our everyday life. And just with that, I think it's, and probably I'm going to make the big assumption that most of the folks on the call tonight, on the video tonight, have a passion for the outdoors, have a passion for forests, I think it's something that's ingrained in us as Canadians. You know, we certainly have a long history of being connected to the forest. Certainly, the settlement of Canada, in particular, you know, up in northern Ontario and certainly the Ottawa Valley and such. You know, going after those big white pine, all around forests and forestry, and so I think we've got that long heritage that we're really connected to the forest right across Canada. And I think it's a certain thing, you know, so I'm just going to bounce around a little bit here, just on how important forests and trees in particular are to us. And I was just, this is a shot actually I took in the cooling potential and value of trees. And I was driving down the road, we were going to a Owen Sound Folk Festival, and I just happened to see this horse and a bunch of cows sitting there under the shade of the tree. And I pulled over and had to take a picture of this. My wife thought I was losing my mind. And she said, no, it's going to be a really cool shot to be able to show, you know, how we all seem to value trees. We got to the folk festival, and it was one of the work sessions there, and one of the workshops. I wasn't particularly interested in it, but it was a really hot day. And it was like 35, 36 degrees Celsius sort of thing. And it was just, again, kind of wandering around, having a look at things and noting, I'm not sure, can you see the cursor on this right now that I'm passing around here at all? Yeah, okay, perfect. Okay, so yeah, so you can see the people all in the shade of this tree. The workshop was a couple of hours. And within those couple of hours, as the sun changed, people would just continue to shift around just ever so slightly to get into the shade of the tree. So really, it's just amazing the value of the people show just one tree on its own. But certainly, I think we all have a appreciation of, you know, how valuable trees are and forests are. Certainly, the slogan that the trees are the lungs of the earth. You know, there's all sorts of literature now on how important it is to be able to go out and walk in the forest. I call it forest bathing. There's actually people that are charging to take people out now for a walk in the forest. Of course there is. But yeah, certainly a lot of value in that. And people just naturally feel good when you're walking in the forest. But, you know, and it's, again, all the values that are associated with our forests, certainly the purifying of water, securing shorelines, the rigors and the recreation that our forests provide us. Certainly cannot forget about the wildlife habitat, you know, that we value so much. And not to forget too about the incredible wood products that come from our forests. And of course, we all know that we use forest products probably each and every day of our lives. So we're really quite connected to our forests and have quite a passion for our forests. Just a little plug about our forests, just on a Canadian context. And I think it's, again, something that a lot of Canadians aren't aware of, and certainly Ontarians may not be aware of. But we actually have some of the best managed forests in the world. Canada has about 9% of the world's forests, and we have about 38% of the world's certified forests. So we're definitely, you know, punching above the belt when it comes to the certification of our forests. And I think it's really important to note that this is third-party certification that come in and assess the forestry that's going on our forest right across Canada. So it's always, I think, really important that people understand that of how sustainable we do manage our forests. Here's just an indication of what other certifications are around in the world. So you can definitely see that we're doing very, very well. Predominantly because the majority of our forests are public land, crown lands, and so very highly regulated forests right across Canada. So anyway, just thought I'd point that out. And of course, there's all sorts of values that we have for our forests. And I actually happened to just see that. So I was like, okay, I'll just throw this one in, but really showing the value of chopping trees. Not so great for the tree, but apparently it does have quite a positive outcome as far as testosterone goes. And one thing that I usually like to try to point out too is in talking about forests, and certainly up in Sault Ste. Marie, you know, you're surrounded by beautiful forests throughout. You're in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence forest region. Just slightly further to the west and north is the boreal forest. So there's a lot of forested land there. But just as important as that the large rural forest, you know, I think it's always important to think about individual trees, like I was talking about, and the urban forests. So when I'm looking and thinking about the values of all these things, when I'm thinking about the forest, it really is one forest. And I've challenged people down in Toronto, for instance, to tell me, where does the urban forest start or stop and the rural forest take over? And if you think of moving from boreal in the northern Ontario down through southern Ontario, and you getting into the highly populated areas, there's a slow transition of trees and such. So it's really, I think, fascinating to see that, it's all the single trees, as pointed out earlier, are so important as much as the large forests that we love to talk about. And of course, one of the things that why I was asked to come here to talk today was to talk about our forests and climate change and what's happening with climate change, and how is climate change going to be mitigated through our forests, and how are our forests going to be challenged and impacted by climate change. And it is, climate change is an incredible threat to our forests. We certainly see, and certainly the byproducts of climate change is the flooding. This is the Don Valley down in Toronto. I don't know why somebody would try to drive through that, but they did. But really, as far as our forests go, we continue to see incredible windstorms coming down, downbursts that just rip apart the forest. I know there was just this summer, I'm in Huntsville, and just outside of Huntsville, there was another downburst that came through. It just wiped out all sorts of trees, but there's all sorts of other impacts, the drought situation, that we see each and every year, and which leads to, as I'm sure you're all aware, the incredible fires that we've had, certainly out in BC, all sorts of fires, but in Northern Ontario too. In fact, the Woodland Caribou Provincial Park, 20% of that park burnt this year. With the drought conditions, with the high winds, with the fuel loading that goes on in those types of forests. And it's always like 75,000 hectares that burnt up in the Caribou Provincial Park. So, climate change is definitely having that kind of impact on our forests. And then when we look across over to BC and see the mountain pine beetle, the incredible devastation this is having. Now, the reason that this is occurring is because we're getting warmer temperatures. And in fact, the pine beetle is on its way east. It's jumped over the Rockies, which would have normally kept it at bay from being able to move east. And now we're seeing the population start to move eastward and more, and even towards, Ontario, which is just really of consideration. If it starts getting an appetite for our spruce and jack pines, we're going to be in real big trouble. So these are all impacts of climate change. And then we look at the species and the species migration itself, and how are our forests going to adapt to this climate change? And people say, well, sure, yeah, the trees will move and all that sort of thing. And this is true. Trees do move too quickly. In fact, it's estimated they move about potentially 100 meters per year. So, of course, that's great. And it always happens. And forests are very dynamic and constantly changing. But when you consider, the how quickly climate change is happening, how quickly we're seeing those temperatures increase, and you really start to worry about, well, how is that actually going to impact our trees and our forests? And, can they possibly adapt quickly enough to climate change? So if I look at just as an example, here's a white pine and the current range of white pine. So you can see the green, that's 85–100% likely to have white pine there. The yellow is a 50%. And if I go down one more slide, the future, the 2016 predicted range, you can see that the range has been pushed north, and where the white pine was in the south is no longer likely to occur at all. So it is a little scary. I'm just going to push it back up to the top and then back again to the bottom. So you can really see that the climate change, the increasing temperatures, the increases in severe drought and rain precipitation, is really going to have an impact on our forests, and it's going to be an interesting to see over the next 20 or 30 years, is really how things are going to adapt and change, and can we get ahead of it? Can we keep ensure that our forests are being maintained and being healthy? So you can see that basically the concept is our trees have to migrate 30% faster than they normally would to keep up with climate change. So that's that's a pretty tall order to be asking for a forest. I like to show this picture because it's just I don't like leaving things in gloom and doom, and always to the point of there's hope. And so this is a picture of hope. And when we start thinking about climate change and we start thinking about nature-based solutions, and I think there's been a lot of talk about that. And I just wanted to point back to our sustainably managed forests. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change in 2019, not too long ago, really started to identify and recognize how important sustainable forest management is going to be in order to address climate change. Now, it's not the only magic bullet. It's, we can't go that far, but it really is. When you think of the amount of products and wood and wood sequestering carbon, CO2, and 50% of that wood product, that you get is carbon. And I think what's really exciting these days is people are starting to understand more and more of the cycle of carbon. And it used to be that the concept was, well, sure, trees are, we'll call it a short-term carbon sink. And at some point they're going to fall down and then potentially burn or decompose. And that carbon is just going to be let back up in the atmosphere. But when you consider that, if you then take the wood products, you're not just letting it rot out and the carbon going back, but you're actually going to use those wood products. And those wood products are going to hold that carbon beyond the natural life cycle of the tree. Now you're really into a linear system where you plant more trees, they get harvested, they go into wood products, and so on and so forth. And so you really are creating these long-term carbon sinks for the carbon that's going to sequester a lot of CO2 out of the atmosphere. We've got a program or a campaign called It Takes a Forest. And I certainly like to promote the idea that, sustainably produced wood products really do fight climate change. And certainly we're seeing when now this, if you're familiar with cross-laminated timbers, and it's cross-laminated timbers in the building, and this is the Brock Commons out in UBC, some 18 stories tall, made of this cross-laminated timber. And if you haven't heard of it before, it's sort of like cross-laminated timber is just that. It's 2x4s and 2x6s all put together. It's sort of like plywood on steroids. And these are massive buildings that they can put up, 18 stories. This is still in the pilot stage, but really looking at being able to secure again that carbon in the wood products of these buildings. And a lot of these tall wood buildings are coming on stream. And always people are recognizing and identifying the fact that they are sequestering carbon long-term within them. So that's a sustainably produced forest, and how they work and how they are going to help to fight climate change. But now I just wanted to start talking about what one of the other subjects that you were asked me to speak about tonight, and that's the 50 million tree program and how that works. And I think it's really important to note that, as I said earlier, this is an afforestation program. So it's planting trees in areas that have been void of forests or trees for some time. It's establishing new forests, and it's certainly been recognized that really, when we plant more trees, just that in itself is helping to address climate change. And it's not just me saying this. There's a lot of folks that are starting to point at, and recognize the value of tree planting. And I'm sure most of you recognize Greta Thunberg and her efforts to try to get people to respond and be responsible for addressing climate change and doing things about it. And she and George Monbiot did a short film, and they started talking about the benefits of trees in addressing climate change. And they coined the phrase, trees are the answer. And so they were promoting this in a very significant way. There was, you may recall, a couple of years ago where a Swedish scientist came up with the notion of planting 1 trillion trees around the world, and how much carbon and CO2 that would sequester out of the atmosphere. So very lofty goals to plant 1 trillion trees. But again, people started to get excited about tree planting, about understanding how valuable trees and new trees were, and creating new forests. And it was really, what was really exciting for us, and I don't know if some of you may have heard, but back in 2019, the province decided to pull funding for the 50 million program. And it was that was somewhat of a shock. But they identified it was for, addressing the deficit, and that was very clear that's what that government was going to do. And shortly thereafter, Minister McKenna from the federal government provided support to keep the wheels on the 50 million program, and that was June 5th of 2019. Now, what was really, really fascinating with that was just, again, the amount of public support that people were showing for tree planting. And so we've just come through an election process in 35 days or whatever that was. But back then, a mere 2 years ago, there was the first election process that was coming along through here. And in fact, again, the public was getting so excited about tree planting that Trudeau, during his platform and his campaign, he pledged to plant 2 billion trees over 10 years, should he be elected. And what was so amazing was Elizabeth May was pledged to plant 10 billion trees by 2050. So here you have, the leaders of the parties having an auction on who's gonna plant more trees. When did you ever hear of an election heading that way? We're actually talking about the environment. You're actually talking about tree planting. And it was really amazing to see that amount of energy and that amount of enthusiasm going into planting trees. What was kind of interesting just in this past election, and not to get into it too much, but it wasn't quite as highlighted as certainly previous elections, unfortunately. But there was still mention of it. Trudeau still had that in his platform, so that was fine. But yeah, it was just this sensation that was going on about tree planting. And I would suggest that it's still there. We're still seeing a real uptake in the amount of people that want to plant trees through our program. So I'm going to talk a bit about the 50 million program now. And it is a program that started in 2000. It was actually announced by McGuinty in 2007. First trees went in the ground in 2008. And it is a program that is a full service program for landowners to get trees planted on their property. Like I said, the eligibility for the sites are generally areas that have not had trees on them for some time. And native trees have to be planted. I think the minimum right now is 500, depending on where you are. But it really is, it's the whole program is to get professional tree planting services in to get these trees planted and forests established. There's the planting delivery agents that we work with. They are absolutely key. And as I mentioned, Doug Hevener with Nanawasaga Valley, he's one of our key planting partners, planting in that watershed. And it really is, we completely depend on the boots on the ground, as I call them, to go out. We meet with landowners, and we've got partners all across Ontario. And these folks are professional foresters, professional tree planters. They go out, they meet the landowner, they talk about what the landowner's objectives are. They look at the site, they determine what species are best suited for the site. And then between those two things, they come up to prepare a site plan. They organize the stock being ordered from the various nurseries that are supporting native stock, seed source material. They bring in the tree planters, oversee the planting, and then do assessments following up. So it's a full service program. What's of significance is that the funding that we get from the federal government is used to reduce the cost of the planting cost of our planting partners, so that they don't have to charge the landowner as much to plant trees. So we know that if we can keep those costs down, then it's going to be that much more affordable for landowners to dedicate their land for the societal benefit of establishing these new forests. So we do everything we can to really keep those costs down. There's a bit of an argument as to whether landowners should be paying anything at all for getting trees planted. Unfortunately, we don't have a budget that we can really contemplate that too much. But certainly, one thought is, well, it's nice that the landowner contribute a little bit just so they have some skin in the game. But kind of the flip side of that is that, well, it's that societal benefit, so maybe it should just be completely free for the landowner. So, and the debate continues. We've been having that debate for some 18 years now between the various planting partners that we have. So, but it is really, really important to make sure that we have the subsidies available to keep those costs down for the landowners. So, as I mentioned, we have a number of collaborative partners. Carrie Mclaughlin, who is listening tonight, she again is the CEO of the Forestry and Conservation Association. They are the be all and end all of seed, and certainly doing a lot of work with municipalities to figure out what the municipality should be considering for future species consideration within their areas, how the species are going to move around, how the systems need to be set up to be able to adapt to climate change as it's moving forward. So they're really, and I know they've done a number of projects for a number of municipalities just along those lines. So certainly something that perhaps Carrie could talk to you at some point about providing that kind of service up in the Sault Ste. Marie area. And of course, we have our conservation authorities. There's some 38 CAs right across Ontario that we work with, the stewardship groups, First Nations, forest industries, municipalities, forestry consultants, and of course, nurseries are absolutely key to this whole thing as well, making sure that we've got really good high quality stock from the seed that's collected, seed source material that they're producing, in order to make sure we've got high quality stock to go in the ground. The forestry consultants, like I said, all these folks, they're professional foresters. They are the boots on the ground. They're the ones that are meeting with the landowners, and we just could not do the work that we've done over the last 18 years without this fantastic collaboration that's involved over that time. Not that I think you're going to be able to read that, but I just thought I'd just show you. Here's just a page of all of the partners that we work with. Some 87 or so right across Ontario. So it's a very much a collaborative effort. No one organization can do it all these days. So we're very, very pleased to have so many great partners out there working with us. One thing that really has come to light, certainly over the 18 years that we've been doing this, is that tree planting is a complex system. It's very multifaceted. There are all sorts of components to it that need specialization and need to be considered. I talked about seed collection and identifying seed areas where those need to be, and that's absolutely key, obviously, because you have to have the seed for the nurseries to grow the stock. Knowing where the seed comes from is so critical in this whole process, because we need to know where it's coming from, so that down the road, if we can assess and monitor and see how those forests are doing, and then if we have to make changes to that, then we know where the seed came from, so we can adapt accordingly. But all of these steps, I'm not going to go through each one in any great detail, but it's all highly integrated. So you can't bust these things apart and expect it to work. We've found that out over the 18 years or so we've been developing this complex partnership as well that we've been working with. So it really is about the seed that we collect. As I mentioned, there's a lot of work that goes on. The FGCA actually has a certified seed collectors program. So they train seed collectors to go out and are deployed. We deploy some of the FGCA certified seed collectors to go out and collect seed for us, working with the nurseries to develop the stock to appropriate standards, working with planting partners, and always looking at best management practices and how are we going to optimize survival in the work that we're doing, and then of course monitoring. And you have to make sure that you have the resources in place to go in after the fact, check the trees out. How are they doing? Again, because of the severe drought conditions we've had over a couple of seasons now, we've had some pretty high mortality. So we have to have the resources to go back, check it out, and then possibly replant the sites. To the point being, and somebody say, well, I guess we kind of lost on that one. I say, well, no, it's still a good site. Because of climate change, because of these severe conditions that we're experiencing, it's just going to be a little bit trickier to get trees established on those sites. But that doesn't mean we should just walk away from it. We need to be diligent about going back and making sure that we get that forest established. And again, back to the seed, it all starts with the seed. So incredibly important. And we're really working towards ensuring we have a long-term supply, to the point where, and again, in working with the FGCA, we've got about 204 million viable seeds from 19 seed zones in storage right now. And those would produce somewhere around 50 million seedlings. So quite a few, but every year, we're deploying certified seed collectors to go out, collect more seed, continue to boost up the seed bank so that we have a strong number of seed and a viable seeds. Seeds don't last forever. They have a shelf life. And so we have to constantly make sure that the seed that we're storing is going to be high quality so that when we sell it, when we give it to the nurseries, they're going to have really good seed to work with to then grow the stock that we're going to outplant. So this has been an endeavor. I'm not sure if anybody remembers when the Ontario Tree Seed Plant was closed in 2018, but that was a shock. The seed plant was an extremely valued operation that was run by the Ministry of Natural Resources, and MNR decided to shut it down. And us, Forest Ontario, in working with the FGCA very closely, put together a number of proposals to the government on how we could potentially take over some of the activities there. The MNR did provide us with some resources to do some research and come up with some business plans. But at the end of the day, they still decided to close it down. But we came up with some really good valued production, just of the seed and the cost to run seed plants that we continue to look for support in order to get that infrastructure built that up. But at the same time, we're still moving forward. We've done a pretty good job of building up what we can with the resources that we have, and certainly, with the federal funding that we've received, a lot of a fair component of that goes into the seed. It's not just about planting the tree in the ground; it's about supporting that entire infrastructure that I mentioned earlier to make sure that at the end of the day, the goal is to have a healthy forest. And so when we work with the nurseries, always working with them and the PDA and our planting partners, make sure there's good communications there. Who needs what kind of stock? What kind of species do they think they're going to be looking for in the future? And so that gets relayed back to the nurseries, and we put in long-term orders with the nurseries. A lot of the stock in Southern Ontario takes 2 to 3 years to grow. So there's a lot of forecasting, a lot of guesswork, because we're working with private landowners. We don't necessarily have the landowners lined up 3 years ahead of time. So we have to take a best guess at what will be the species needed 3 years down the road, and then again get the seed sourced seed being used, and then get the nurseries growing the stock accordingly and to standards, so that we know we've got good high quality stock being sent out to our planting agencies to be put into the landowner's property. The public outreach is one of those things that so oftentimes people forget about, and certainly, but it's so critical in order to be able to reach out to the public, reach out to landowners, talk to landowners about tree planting, and quite often it's got to be multiple visits that are taken with a landowner to bring them on board with the benefits of tree planting. Certainly, a lot of it helps with just doing technical workshops as well for the public, and so that they get a better understanding of all the things that are involved with tree planting and have a better appreciation of it. So it's not just going down to the local nursery that may not be selling native material and doing tree planting with that, but really push the need for seed sourced stock, high quality native species to be used in our tree planting efforts. And then there's a community tree plants, and this little guy here, he's at one of the tree plants, and so important, again, the engagement with youth and just families in general, to talk about tree planting, the benefits of tree planting, and getting them out, literally getting their hands dirty, planting a few trees. And it often really helps just to, again, get that connection to the forest and to the trees as we're moving the program forward. And not to think that we know it all at this point in time, we don't. So we're constantly looking for new ways to regenerate areas. These are just some of the various projects that we've worked on. We do know that, you know, there's going to be need to come up with various systems to get our forests established again versus just the traditional, you know, going out with a bag of trees and planting them. We've actually worked with a company, a drone company, that are talking about, you know, literally shooting seed pods into the ground instead of actually going in and planting a bare root seedling or a plug. So that's been a lot of fun working with those folks. And if they can get it working, it's going to blow the doors off production for tree planting. So we're really hoping that we can see that move forward in a significant way. The capacity development is always important too. As I said, working with our partners, making sure they're aware of best management practices. Quite often, we'll have, well, we do every year, we have a post-plant meeting with all of our planting partners. And quite often it's the planting partners that are exchanging ideas between them. They are the experts on the ground and bringing everybody together. This year was, because of COVID, it was a video call, or video conference. But in past years, it's always great just to get together with everybody and kicking ideas around. But really, really important to be able to have that opportunity to do that. So since 2008, we planted our first tree. We have planted over 34 million trees under the 50 million program. Creating more than 17,000 hectares of forest and working with over 6,000 landowners. So we're extremely proud of that. You can see the extent of the tree planting throughout Ontario. Obviously, there's an awful lot of it that's occurring in Southern Ontario. And certainly, I've always felt that it's so important to be able to provide that kind of program to Northern Ontario as well. There's lots of land available in Northern Ontario, privately owned land that hasn't had trees on it for many decades. And I think it's great that we have such great partners up in Northern Ontario, great planting partners, and the infrastructures up in Northern Ontario to allow us to get trees planted on predominantly private lands there as well. And just because I thought it might come up, here's a map of the trees that have been planted in the Sault Ste. Marie area. And we've had a fantastic, one of our field advisors up there, Peter Gagnon. I don't know if any of you folks know him, but he's been instrumental in getting so many sites planted in the Sault Ste. Marie area. And in fact, Peter travels all over Northern Ontario. He'll take a 5-hour drive just to go get a jug of milk, I think. But he really, he doesn't mind traveling at all. So he services a lot of Northern Ontario area. And so you can see that since 2005, actually, with the Forest 2020 program included, there's been over 300,000 trees planted in the Sioux area with 60 projects or so. So I thought it was just kind of interesting to see that. And certainly out by the airport, I remember there was a Forest 2020 site that we planted there in 2005. It's probably one of the ones that's on the pin here. And that was a project, Forest 2020 was a federal project back in the day. And it started to assess what the opportunities were for tree planting, for sequestering carbon dioxide. So it was kind of interesting how it's gone full circle from the Forest 2020 program, and which started actually 2004. 2005 was the big year. And then that moved over to the 50 million program, which of course was initially provincially funded, now back over to being federally funded. So it has gone around, but it's great to continue to have support to keep the wheels on the whole infrastructure required to have a successful tree planting program. So I thought I'd just quickly give you an update on the 2 billion tree program that I mentioned earlier. As I said, back in 2019, there was quite a stir with the various politicians and such about tree planting. And in fact, as I'm sure you all know, Trudeau, of course, won the election back in 2019. And very shortly thereafter, he had Minister O'Regan and Minister Wilkinson that both had reference to the 2 billion tree program moving forward in their mandate letters. So that was 2013, 2019 that both these ministers came out and identified that they were going to continue, they were going to move forward with the commitment that Trudeau made for the 2 billion tree program. And then, as I'm sure you're all aware, things started to really cook along with working with the government, the staff, and Forest Ontario was engaged almost weekly with the federal staff. They recognized the expertise that had been acquired here in Ontario with Forest Ontario and all of our partners and that model, and recognize that as a really solid model to move forward with, across Canada. And so again, lots of discussions, and of course, COVID hit. So in mid-March or so, it was everything just came to a screeching halt. Unfortunately, a lot of the work that was being done on the 2 billion came to a halt as well. And finally they come through that. And fortunately, with the staff and such of the federal government, they did continue to move forward, and we did see some progress. It was definitely stalled out for several months, but they have moved forward, and it's great to see the progress that's being made with the 2 billion tree program. Just to give you an idea, so it's it's always interesting when you say, okay, 2 billion trees, that's a lot of trees for sure. And I think it's important to try to get our heads wrapped around just what that means. And so this is the 2 billion trees is trees that are to be planted to create new forest above and beyond what the forest industry already plants. So the forest industry, as we said, we're great, high level of certification. The forest industry are required by law to regenerate the areas that they harvest. So some of the techniques to do that are with tree planting. So the forest industry across Canada plants somewhere between 500 to 600 million trees each year. So this 2 billion tree program is not, what we've been told, is not about providing resources for the forest industry to plant trees, which would otherwise be required by law for them to regenerate areas. So it's not that. This is about creating new forests. So I've talked to partners right across Canada. There's some rough estimates of how much afforestation is going on across Canada. We're planting anywhere between 2.5 to 3 million trees per year. Probably in Ontario, there's another couple million on top of that outside of the 50 million program right across Canada. And that's the biggest afforestation program in Canada. Probably right across Canada, I'm estimated that's probably around 10 to 15 million trees per year. So if you think about that figure, that we're 10 to 15 million per year in afforestation work, the 2 billion tree program then in 10 years is 200 million trees per year that have to be planted in addition to what the forest industry's already planted. That's a huge number. And that is going to require a lot. And the federal government knows that's a huge number. And it's going to require increase in overall capacity and all of the components that I've already talked about that we've been working on. But it's just gonna have to be, go through just an incredible amount of work to get, make sure we got the right seed. There's also all sorts of questions have been asked about what about stock? Do we have the nurseries in place to grow, that amount of additional stock? And I've certainly had enough discussions with the nurseries, and they've always told me, said, you make sure that there's long-term sustainable funding in place, and we'll make the business decision on whether we should increase our nurseries or not. So that's what they're looking for, the long-term deal. There's not room or greenhouses just sitting there empty, waiting for 200 million trees to be grown in. That would just be bad business. All the nurseries are privately owned. So that's a huge consideration. And of course, all the other things that need to happen in there, including just getting tree planters out. It's a hard enough right now to find tree planters. So that needs to be increased. So it really is an interesting challenge for the government, and certainly they understand and we understand, and have told them that it can't just be coming from government. We need to look for other ways to support this kind of initiative. And so looking for donations, individuals, corporations, whoever can help support that infrastructure is so necessary to be able to achieve these kinds of goals. So we're really seeing that, that long-term investment, as we just keep hearing, and it's, for anybody like the conservation authorities, if they're gonna if they're going to consider increasing what they're doing, then that's going to mean, well, probably hiring more staff. And again, what's the long-term commitment that they can do that with? The nurseries, like I described, the same thing. The seed, with the certified seed collectors out there, right now we've got enough to collect the seed that we currently need. But if we're talking about amping up, to 200 million trees per year, if you just take a quick 5-to-1 ratio, that's a ton of seed. What is it? 200 million, 10 million, oh boy, 10 billion trees, seeds per year. Anyway, that's a whole bunch. I should have that number figured out. Anyway, I don't. But yeah, it's just a whole lot. So, and then staffing just in general, people need to know what kind of staffing you're going to have. It's all going to require that long-term sustainable funding that's in place, that needs to be in place. So I think with the 2 billion tree program, at the end of the day, it is back, as I mentioned earlier, it is back in the Liberal platform. There is continued commitment to move forward with the 2 billion tree program. It's going to require, again, that integrated approach in order for it to realize it and to be successful. And we're at a point in time now where we need to make sure we do it right. And certainly, as I said, with all the things that are happening with climate change and how we can increase our forest cover to help mitigate climate change, but also increase our forest cover to help adapt to climate change. And certainly we do have an opportunity now. We can't wait, another decade to do it, as we have to do this now. And it all comes down to, and a quote from Steve Hounsell, our past chair at Forest Ontario, it's all really comes down to ensuring that we get the right tree in the right place for the right reason. And certainly, I'm hoping that people understand the complexity of tree planting. It's not something you just turn the light switch off and on. It does require that infrastructure and long-term investment to keep that infrastructure in place, and in this case, growing. And so certainly if we don't recognize we need to do it for ourselves right now, then hopefully we know and recognize that we need to do it for the future generations. Thank you very much.
So do we have questions for Rob? Well, I'll start off. Rob, how does one access this program, or how is it advertised? How does one find out about it?
Yeah, so certainly, we have it on our website, forestontario.ca. There's an application process there that's online, or you can call and talk to our office directly. The phone numbers are on the website. And certainly, absolutely, if you're interested, if you contact our office, we can connect you with the appropriate parties, the appropriate planting delivery agents in the area. Come out and have a look at your property and start talking about the tree planting.
Well, I'll ask you another question then. Is we talked about climate change adaptation, and you talked about white pine and the change in its range. How is climate change adaptation then how does that figure into your strategy for selecting species?
Yeah, great question. So, and it's the crux of it, because people say, well, should we start, planting, trees from Florida in our area now just to anticipate climate change, which of course that's not going to work, because those trees now aren't going to do well with the current conditions. So as I said before, it really is about, slowly adapting to the various species that we want to slowly move across the region and potentially north. Really recognizing, again, what those species are, keeping track of them, monitoring, setting up migration studies to see how various species are going to adapt to climate change as it progresses. Back to the seed, knowing where the seed's coming from to grow the stock, and then being able to adapt what seed you're using and where you're collecting from to be able to, again, be able to adapt to climate change as it progresses. Some of the sort of the bigger ideas too are just really, when it comes to climate change, is having ensuring that we have large, contiguous, diverse, and healthy forests. And if we can ensure that kind of characteristics of the forest, then it'll figure itself out. There'll be the winners and losers, but we've got to just make sure that, you know, we create the opportunity for species to migrate. Again, they're not going to migrate quickly, but a lot of those large contiguous forests are the way that those forests are going to maximize and staying healthy.
Okay, Rob, we have a question, I think, from Peter Wells.
Rob, thank you for a great presentation. The idea of Florida trees up here, which and then maybe that would invite Florida birds, you know, palm trees and flamingos. I got an email from a colleague this morning asking me to if I could get on the phone with her tonight, and I said no. I'm going to be watching a presentation on the 50 Million Trees Initiative, and so I put her off to tomorrow. And she's the kind of person who's going to say, tell me about this 50 million trees thing. And I want to be able to respond to her in terms of outcome. So 50 million trees, if you look at this as an activity towards climate mitigation, what am I going to tell Elizabeth tomorrow afternoon in terms of outcome, in terms that she can relate to, not in terms of tons of carbon, but what is the big carbon benefit in some, you know, in a way that she as a layperson will understand when I tell her tomorrow what 50 million trees can do to mitigate climate change.
So giving you 6.5 gigatons or whatever of carbon is not probably going to do it. You want a number of cars traveled across Canada.
Something.
Yeah, I wish I could give you something like that, Peter, off the top of my head, but I don't know. Maybe other folks here might know.
Yeah, I'm always looking for kind of relatable human scale metrics, and you know, all the people, I know a lot of the folks on the call this evening, and we tend to get wonky when we get together and we talk about, you know, we have our own little language and tons of carbon, but I'm just looking for, you know, sort of layperson language. But thank you. I mean, or ping me in the future.
The one thing I should have said this too, and I know the focus was on climate change. And sequestering carbon and wood products and all those types of things. But the other aspect that we can't forget about is by increasing forest, again, increasing healthy forest, diverse, contiguous, all those things, we're also working towards addressing the loss of biodiversity. And of course, that in itself is so important right now. We know that we're losing biodiversity in a number of areas. And so, you know, for all the values that our forests provide, and I indicated those earlier, but we really need to make sure that what we're doing isn't just a single value, if you will. It's multiple benefits from increasing that forest cover.
Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from Douglas Hevenor. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. Thanks for a great talk tonight. It's a pleasure to always a pleasure to hear you speak. I just wanted to touch on one of the comments you made in your talk about, you know, this transition through climate change of species work. Here at the NVCA, over the last decade, and it's taken a decade to introduce American sycamore into our planting program, you know, you got to take into considerations of how does the nursery handle a seed species that they haven't worked with before? What are the techniques they use to clean the seed? How do they store the seed? How do they germinate the seed? What's the planting window like? What's the browse going to be like in the ground? Like when we saw the advent of emerald ash borer moving into Ontario from Livonia, Michigan, we thought, wow, hackberry will be the replacement tree for American ash. It's going to be like an elm. It's a great tree. Well, it's like a jar of peanut butter for the deer and the browse forest. So we don't even plant it anymore. Like, so it is interesting that, you know, we have to reach out and we have to try different trees. But during your talk tonight, I was chatting with Carrie, and I thought, you know, and you mentioned bring a tree from Florida. I thought, well, what about Taxodium Disticum? You know, it's growing in Goderich, Ontario now in location. It's growing in the Niagara Peninsula in location. It's an amazing wetland species. But the problem that we face when we want to transition these trees is that refrigerator freeze. We get that 40 Celsius temperature or 40 degree Fahrenheit temperature, and all our work is for naught. So it's just going to take a great, great response from everybody. But I wanted to come on here tonight and I wanted to pump Conservation and Forest Ontario for all the great work they've done. For the people in the Sioux, you need to reach out to Rob and his team to find out about this program. We plant 150 to 250,000 of trees a year through our conservation authority through this program. Their staff is incredible. They have an ability to work with the tree landowner, and you won't be disappointed when you reach out and work with this team. They are an amazing group of people, and they're doing the right thing for our province and our country. So that's my cheer for you tonight.
Thanks for that, Doug. Yeah, that's very, very gracious. Thank you. But you know, yeah, I want to comment just too on your seed and the research and development that's needed. And again, I think the FGCA is going to be able to help out here. But the you know, when we start talking about we'll call it the Carolinian species and starting to move east and starting to move north, you know, like you said, we don't know how to really propagate those species effectively. They are, I'll call them, or have been somewhat boutique species. And if we're going to get up and do some large scale restoration work, afforestation work with them, we're going to have to figure out all the things you just described. You know, when we can go collect, how we have to stratify, how we can store if possible. You know, all those things that need to be considered when you start working with seed and moving it around a bit. So it's yeah, a lot of research that needs to go on to be able to make that work. But thanks again, Doug. Great to see you here.
Do we want to look at the chat window, Rob? If you open the chat window, I think you'll see some questions.
Okay. All right. Just I saw something about hardwoods. Oh, there you go.
Well, yeah, I can't type properly, but the question is, it seemed like you had all softwoods there, and I wondered if you had any plans to plant any hardwood trees.
Yeah, no, we certainly do. We you know, there's a number of hardwoods that we include. And again, it's all about what are the species best suited to the site. So, and it's, you know, we have partners depending on where they are, what species they're going to plant. There are definitely, you know, native species, that's the key. But definitely, you know, hardwoods are part of the mix in getting the trees planted. One of the things that Doug actually just kind of tweaked to this was the fact that, you know, generally hardwoods you can plant them. They tend to be more expensive, and they tend to be quite a bit more expensive in protecting them against rodents and deer and, you know, mice and things like that. So it's you know, you've got to have that in your cost estimate when you start thinking about hardwoods. But no, we want to make sure that there's diversity there. That being said, and I wish I should have provided the YouTube link to it, but we had a good video. And it just shows the transition of a plantation of red pine, predominantly of the monoculture of a red pine, through the various stages over about 60 or 70 years to reaching a very diverse hardwood forest. And so the red pine is there to, first of all, secure the site, get rid of some of the grasses competitions, and then slowly but surely you start getting native hardwood species regenerating in, and slowly through a number of thinnings taking over, and you end up with a very diverse forest. So there's a means to an end when you see planting the softwoods. It's not like we're going to have a red pine plantation there forever. It really is to allow for other species to come in long term to get it back to more of that natural forest. I've got, is there any interest in having private citizens collect seeds? Great idea. I think it's you know, something that we need to look at. I think it's the whole thing about, you know, making sure that they're collected at the right time, storing them properly. You know, there's, especially with cones, there's cut tests that need to be done to ensure that there's the seed within the cone and it's viable and all these types of things. So it's not just going out and grabbing a few seeds. There is a complete science and art behind collecting seeds. So I think, with the proper instruction, that could be quite possible. I wouldn't want to say no to good volunteer work. That would be a good one for Carrie if you wanted to field that one. I don't know if you want to jump in here or not. Maybe not. Okay, I'll keep going. What is the issue with seed? Yeah, all of the above. So the question is, what is the issue with seeds? Finding them, saving them, or preserving them, or storage, or other? Yeah. So certainly conifer seed does store for a length of time. Hardwoods generally not. Hardwoods, you generally have to go collect the seed and then get it planted right away, so that you're growing, whatever kind of tree you're going to be growing. So again, conifers do have a longer shelf life than hardwoods. Finding them, absolutely. Finding seed is, there used to be, back in the day when M&R was in charge of all of this, they'd have their staff going around and they'd be what's called seed forecasting. So they'd be looking up at the trees, they'd be looking at any kind of seed development, cone development that was going on in the trees from the flowers or the cones or whatnot. And then they'd watch them through the season to then determine if there was going to be a bumper crop there or not, where it was located. And then assuming the seed progressed, didn't get nailed by insects or frost or whatever for the flowers and such, then they go and deploy and collect the seed. That system has really disappeared now, and again, thanks to our partners with the CAs and such, those are the eyes of the ground. Those are the folks that are out looking for the seed. We have certified seed collectors as well, that they know where their favorite caches are for collecting the seed. So, but it's just the other part of this that I should have mentioned was trees don't produce seed every year. So with red pine, for instance, red pine produces seed maybe every 7 years, 7 to 10 years. So without having the eyes in the ground, a lot of eyes in the ground, you could potentially miss a crop of seed. And we really need to find that red pine seed. So it's tricky, and it's you need a lot of eyes looking around and knowing what they're looking for. So it's not simple by any means to get seed collected. And again, then you got to store it properly. You got to keep it in a well vented area. I mean, all the things that go with it. So it is it's tricky business. But needless to say, again, with the FTCA and their certified seed collectors program, it's they have the opportunity to get more certified seed collectors on the landscape. Peter Beckett. Hey, Peter, how you doing? Nice to see you here.
Yeah,
Rob.
good to see you.
Says we managed to plant our first 15,000 from the 2 billion tree program in the last 2 weeks. Well done. Excellent. So you got a grant for the first year.
Yes.
Expression of interest. Nicely done.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. Well, hopefully they're forecasted to plant 30 million this year. So we'll see if that happens or not. I hope so. They need to get some trees in the ground. Okay, from Paul. Beyond featuring the program in a webinar like this, do you see any role for organizations like the Sioux Climate Hub moving forward? Absolutely. This is the, spread the word. It's so great when, we can come out and meet with people and have these types of discussions and answer questions and get better information out there. So hopefully you'll be able to tell friends and family what you heard tonight. And if you have anybody that might potentially want to get trees planted on your property, now you know that there's the 50 million program available in your area to do that. And I think it's just, these types of things are fantastic. My preference, quite frankly, is to speak to people or be in a in-person session. I got to tell you, quite honestly, I'm really tired of presenting on a screen. I've been doing it since COVID began. It's fine, but boy, and it saves a lot of travel and everything too. But it would really be nice to be meeting people in person again to have these types of discussions. I think that's sorry. I know Doug sent out a note too, just for our local tree planting partner. There's a Sault Ste. Marie Region Conservation Authority that you could contact in the area for potential tree planting in your area. So thanks, Doug, for that. And that's all the questions. Unless there's any more.
Can you, would it be possible, Rob, for you to send us the Climate Hub a link where you have the various consultants or contacts locally or regionally that that we could put up on our Facebook page?
Sure, I can do that. Absolutely. And would that be to you, Rob? Rob Plumbing?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If you can email me, we can you can get it up there.
Okay.
Well, if there are no more questions, pause for a sec. Then I want to thank you very much, Rob. That was an excellent presentation. We enjoyed it very much. And truthfully, I saw 2 little pins on our properties there on St. Joseph Island. So I was pretty excited to see that.
That's awesome.
So thanks again. And just a reminder, next month, we'll have a presentation by the Algoma Health Unit on public health and climate change. All right. Thanks again.
Thanks very much, folks.